It was the kind of summer day that left you wrung out before noon, heat shimmering over the cracked clay parking lot, dust rising from every boot step. The Denton County livestock auction looked almost wilted beneath the Arkansas sun. Boards curling, metal rails too hot to touch. Beneath the battered tin roof, the air barely moved, thick with the smells of hay, manure, and fried concession food nobody really wanted. Martin Sullivan moved slow through the throng, cane thumping, boots scuffing.
Dad?
Every
Dad, are you
step
all right?
sending a twinge up his right leg where the shrapnel still lived. He wore a faded army cap, sweat trickling down his neck, white whiskers bristling around a mouth set in a line that said, "I've seen worse." The regulars nodded or whispered as he passed. Martin was hard to miss, tall and broad-shouldered, but everything about him said used to be strong, used to be fast, used to belong. He didn't come here to buy, not really. Most weeks he wandered the pens to kill time, maybe swap a story about old horses and older wounds, and then leave with nothing but sore knees and a packet of beef jerky. But today, as he passed the end pen near the cull line, he saw a horse that stopped him cold. The gray gelding stood with his head low, ribs showing under a coat more brown than gray from old scars and recent dirt. He was big, should have been imposing once, but now he sagged in the heat, flies clouding his battered flanks, legs swollen, left fore limp. Someone had painted a red X on his rump. Next stop, the kill buyers. A trio of boys snickered nearby. "Look at that one. Bet he pulls more wagons than a Walmart mule," one jeered. Another said, "Somebody ought to do him a favor, get it over with." Their laughter was sharp, hungry. Martin's jaw tightened. He looked closer. The gelding's eyes, hidden beneath a curtain of coarse mane, met his for an instant, dull and flat. But there was something, some tiny ember refusing to go out. The auctioneer, a thin man with a nicotine-stained mustache, launched into his patter. "What we got here's a fixer-upper, folks. Might give you a few good rides, might not. Start me at 100. Do I hear 100? 90? 75? Silence, save for shifting boots. The horse stamped, hobbled. One of the kill buyers, an impatient man in a red ball cap, raised a paddle. 50! Take him off your hands! 50! Do I hear 60? No! Going once! Martin's cane thunked against the wood. 55! Heads turned. Whispers rippled. Some people smirked. A woman in a floral dress shook her head, pity in her eyes. Martin ignored them. The kill buyer glared, but didn't raise. The gavel fell. "Sold. To the gentleman in the back for 55. Martin handed over 3 crumpled 20s. The clerk barely looked at him. "You want a trailer, sir? Or we can hold him till the truck comes." "I'll take him now," Martin said, voice steady. A new ripple of laughter. "He's gonna walk that horse home. That'll be a show. 2 cripples in the sun." Martin took the halter, cool rope rough against his calloused palm. He stepped into the pen. The gelding flinched, whites showing around his eyes, but Martin moved slow, gentle. "Easy now," he said, almost a whisper. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you, not today." It took patience and some luck, but soon the horse's nose bumped his hand. Martin led him out, both of them limping, both battered by the day, into the glare outside. The noise of the crowd faded. Someone threw a plastic cup. Martin didn't flinch. The gelding snorted, ears flicking, but he followed. They made a sorry sight, man and beast, both past their prime, both marked as leftovers. But in the hush that fell as they left the lot, a few people stopped smirking. An old rancher shook his head. A teenage girl nudged her friend and whispered, He's really taking him. Look. The sun beat down, relentless. The walk ahead was miles, past the grain silos, along dusty farm roads, all the way to the far side of Denton Hollow. Martin didn't care. He'd made up his mind. Every step was defiance, against the heat, the pain, the smallness of the world's expectations. As they passed the highway, a pickup slowed. "You all right, mister?" a young man called. Martin nodded. "Just heading home," he said. The horse stumbled, nearly going down, but Martin steadied him. "We're in this together, pal," he murmured. Somewhere behind them, laughter faded into quiet. Two outcasts, one man, one horse, set out under the Arkansas sun, limping side by side, dust rising behind them like a long-forgotten promise. Neither looked back. The road back to Denton Hollow stretched ahead, wavering in the punishing summer heat. Martin Sullivan squinted beneath his army cap, sweat burning his eyes, every step measured and deliberate. At his side, the battered gray gelding, Dusty, limped heavily, matching Martin's slow, awkward rhythm. Each time Martin's cane tapped the dirt, the horse's swollen leg answered with its own weary thud. Together, they looked like survivors of some forgotten battle, wounded, half-marched, but still standing. Traffic roared past in bursts, pickup trucks and farm wagons rumbling by, their drivers glancing sideways at the strange pair on the roadside. Some faces wore smirks, others outright pity, and a few just blinked in confusion. Who in their right mind would haul a half-dead horse home on foot? Martin felt the stares prickling at his back, but he didn't let them touch him. The world had already made its judgments. He was done caring. Dusty's sides heaved with each step, sweat darkening his coarse coat, patches of hide showing through old scars. Now and then, the horse's head drooped low, ears flicking with exhaustion and uncertainty. Martin talked to him, soft and steady, stories half-mumbled between labored breaths. "Almost there, big fella, just another mile. We'll get you some water, let you lie in the shade a while. I know it's tough, but I'm still here, and so are you." At the bend near the Miller place, two boys on bicycles stopped and stared. One pointed and snickered. "Hey, mister, you sure that nag can make it? Looks like he's about to keel over." Martin just waved them off. He caught Dusty's eye, saw a flicker of something like apology, maybe even shame, hidden deep in that tired gaze. "Don't you listen to him," Martin muttered. "Folks around here always think they know how every story ends. We'll write our own, you and me." The sun climbed higher, heat baking the blacktop and radiating up in shimmering waves. Martin's shirt clung to him, heavy with sweat, his leg aching with every stride. At the halfway mark, he stopped beneath a sycamore, both man and horse gasping for air. Martin unfastened the canteen from his belt, took a single swig, and poured the rest into his cupped palm for Dusty. The horse hesitated, nostrils flaring, then nuzzled Martin's hand, licking the last drops of water. Martin smiled, a small private moment no one else would have seen. A battered Ford pickup rumbled up, slowed to a crawl. Mrs. Langley from the feed store leaned out, her face pinched with worry. "Martin, what on earth are you doing out here? That horse looks half dead, and you're not much better. Let me give you both a ride." Martin shook his head. "Appreciate it, ma'am. He's had enough trailers and pens for a lifetime. We'll get there. Just need a little time." She looked as if she might argue, but then saw the set of his jaw and just sighed. "Suit yourself, but don't be too proud to holler if you need help. Folks still care, even if they got a funny way of showing it." She drove on, the truck's engine fading into the hush of grasshoppers and distant bird calls. The next hour felt like walking through soup. Dusty stumbled once, almost falling, but Martin braced himself, cane digging into the dirt. He spoke gently, voice low. "You're doing fine. Every step's a step away from what they wanted for you. I know about that. They wanted to write me off too, back in Nam. Told me I was finished. But I came home anyway." Dusty flicked an ear, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Pain was a language all its own. When they finally reached the crossroads into Denton Hollow, the sun had begun its slow descent, the sky bleeding gold and pink across the fields. Martin could see his little farmhouse in the distance, peeling paint, sagging porch, but home all the same. The barn stood beyond, its doors open like arms waiting for a long-lost friend. A neighbor, old Mr. Jeffries, leaned over his fence, watching as Martin and Dusty shuffled past. "That the best you could find, Sully?" he called, half mocking. Martin just grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "Best $50 I ever spent." Jeffries shook his head, but didn't reply. His wife, watching from the kitchen window, pressed a hand to her mouth. The whole valley would know by sundown. Martin Sullivan's gone and rescued a broken-down horse. Walked him all the way from the auction like some kind of fool. The final stretch felt endless. Martin's leg throbbed, vision swimming. Dusty's steps faltered, breath coming in ragged gasps. Martin tugged gently on the lead rope. "Come on, partner, almost there. Home's just up ahead." As they crossed the pasture, the sun dipped behind the tree line, shadows lengthening. A breeze picked up, finally cooling sweat-soaked skin. Martin led Dusty straight to the barn, the old horse shivering as he stepped onto the straw. Martin lowered the stall gate, fumbled for a battered bucket, filled it with clean water. Dusty drank greedily, water splashing down his muzzle. Eyes half closed in relief. Martin slumped onto a hay bale, cane across his knees, chest heaving. "We made it, Dusty," he whispered, voice thick. "Nobody else but us. They'll laugh. They'll say we're both too busted up to matter. But I got you, and you got me. That's enough for today." Outside, the sky darkened, lightning flickering far to the west. Inside the barn, the world felt quiet, just the steady sound of Dusty's breathing and the gentle rustle of straw. Two outcasts had walked themselves home, refusing to quit, refusing to let anyone else decide what they were worth. Neither one looked back. The first night was the hardest. Thunder growled over the distant hills, lightning casting quick, sharp shadows across the worn boards of the barn. Martin Sullivan leaned heavily on his cane as he moved about, every joint in his body aching from the journey. Dusty, the battered gray gelding, lay curled in the straw, flanks rising and falling with slow, shallow breaths. The barn was quiet except for the occasional rumble from the approaching storm and the persistent chirp of crickets in the grass outside. Martin filled an old kettle with water, setting it on a hot plate in the tack room. While he waited for it to warm, he rummaged through a battered toolbox, a box he hadn't opened since his wife Maggie passed. He found what he needed: bandages, ointments, a stiff bristled brush, and a handful of sugar cubes wrapped in wax paper. He walked back to Dusty, speaking softly so as not to startle him. "Easy, boy, just me. Let's take a look at those legs, huh?" Dusty's ear flicked, but he didn't rise. Martin knelt, pain flaring in his knee, and examined the horse's swollen fetlock. The wounds were raw and crusted, new lines of blood tracing old scars. Martin worked slowly, cleaning the wounds, dabbing ointment on the worst of them. Dusty shivered but did not pull away. It was the first fragile thread of trust. When the work was done, Martin sat down beside Dusty, legs stretched out, back against the stall wall. He unwrapped a sugar cube and held it out, palm flat. The gelding eyed him warily, then, after a long pause, stretched his neck and took the treat with surprising gentleness. Martin smiled, feeling something shift inside him. He talked then, not because he expected Dusty to understand, but because the barn felt less empty with words in the air. "I never meant to end up alone out here," Martin said. His voice echoed softly against the rafters. "I had a wife once, Maggie, smart as a whip, could bake bread with her eyes closed. We thought we'd fill this place with kids and horses and laughter. Instead, she got sick. Too quick, too unfair. I held her hand until the very end, but when she was gone, I just couldn't bring myself to leave." Dusty shifted in the straw, head lowering. Martin reached for another sugar cube, offering it up. "Had a daughter too, Catherine. She's grown now. We don't talk much. I tried after Maggie passed, but I was angry. At her, at myself, at the world. I wanted her to come home, to help me hold this place together, but she had her own life. Sometimes I think she blames me for the way things turned out. Sometimes I think she's right." The storm crept closer, wind rattling the barn door. Martin found himself remembering a different storm, long ago. Rain hammering the jungle. Mortars falling like angry gods. He'd been a younger man then, full of reckless courage. The army had given him purpose, a family of brothers. But when he came home, he brought ghosts with him. Nights were hardest. Every crack of thunder took him back to places he'd rather forget. Now, the ghosts felt quieter, drowned out by Dusty's slow breathing. Martin pulled a faded blanket over the gelding's back and settled in. "I don't know if you're a believer, Dusty. Me, I stopped talking to God a long time ago. But I figure maybe he sent you my way so we could keep each other from falling apart." Every night became a ritual. Martin limped out to the barn at sunset, his pockets full of treats and his heart heavy with memories. He'd tend Dusty's wounds, brush out the worst of the dirt, and settle in for a long conversation. Sometimes he told stories about Maggie, how she once rode a wild colt straight into the pond, laughing all the way. Sometimes he talked about Catherine, her stubborn streak, the way her hair glowed in the morning sun. Other times, he just sat in silence, letting the slow rhythm of Dusty's breath fill the spaces his words couldn't reach. At first, Dusty was withdrawn, flinching at every sudden movement, eyes darting with suspicion. But Martin was patient. He knew the language of broken things. He didn't force affection, didn't expect gratitude. He offered only presence, night after night, rain or shine. On the third night, Dusty allowed Martin to rest a hand on his neck, the horse's muscles trembling beneath the touch, but not pulling away. By the end of the week, Dusty would greet him with a soft nicker, ears pricked forward, and sometimes, if Martin waited long enough, the horse would doze with his head resting on Martin's shoulder. One night, as the barn lay wrapped in darkness, Martin found himself talking about Vietnam, the mud, the fear, the friends he'd lost. His voice broke, the words rough and halting, but Dusty only listened. When Martin fell silent, the gelding reached out and gently nuzzled his arm. It was a small thing, easily missed, but to Martin it felt like forgiveness. Outside, the world kept turning, fields growing wild, the mailbox filling with bills, phone calls from Catherine going unanswered. Martin let the letters pile up on the kitchen table, each one starting with "Dear Cat," but ending with nothing but regret. It was easier to talk to Dusty, easier to believe that maybe with enough time, the wounds could heal. That night, as the rain tapped softly on the roof, Martin leaned back against the stall wall, Dusty's warmth pressed against his side. For the first time in a long while, he felt something like hope, fragile, flickering, but alive. Morning in Denton Hollow came with mist hanging low over the fields, dew shimmering on the worn fence rails, and the distant call of a rooster echoing from a neighbor's farm. Martin Sullivan watched sunlight bleed through cracks in the old barn as Dusty, stronger with each passing day, nuzzled at his pockets for the usual treat. The quiet between them was companionable, earned, not awkward. But each sunrise also brought another kind of ache. A hollow Martin couldn't fill with work or small talk, one that stretched further than the fields he called home. It was the silence of a house too empty and a table too long for just one man. As Dusty crunched his apple, Martin shuffled back to the kitchen and stared at the stack of unsent letters to his daughter. Some had coffee stains and wrinkled corners. Others were crisp, new, barely creased. Not one had found its way into an envelope. He sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, staring at the latest blank page. "Dear Catherine," he wrote, pausing. The words never came easy. They'd spoken only a handful of times since Maggie's funeral, each call ending in old wounds picked raw. Memories clashing with blame and misunderstanding. Martin would always promise himself he'd try again, and each time he faltered, sometimes because of pride, sometimes fear. Mostly the ache of missing her without knowing how to bridge the years between them. He glanced at the phone, willing it to ring, to break the stillness with the sound of her voice. Sometimes it did, but each time he picked up, Catherine's tone was clipped, businesslike, as if she was calling a stranger. The words he longed for, "Dad, how are you? I miss you," never came. Most days she didn't call at all. He'd leave voicemails that trailed off in awkward pauses, then sit with the phone in his lap, listening to the barn's hush. That morning, he tried again, dialing Catherine's number with a trembling hand. Her voicemail answered after 3 rings. "Hey, Cat, it's me," he said, his voice rough. "Just wanted to check in. Got myself a new project, an old horse from the auction. You wouldn't believe the state he was in. Anyway, I hope you're well. Call me back if you get a chance." He hung up, shame blooming in his chest. Even the updates sounded like apologies. Martin's world shrank to the rituals of repair. Brush Dusty's coat, clean his wounds, fix the fence, repeat. The routine gave shape to his days, but loneliness pressed close, a silent presence at every meal and in every shadow of the house. He caught himself talking to Maggie's photograph, asking questions she could never answer. The old radio played country tunes in the kitchen, but the static made the rooms seem emptier. Dusty seemed to sense the heaviness in the air. Some afternoons, when Martin slumped onto the porch with a sigh, the horse would come close, nuzzling his shoulder, standing so near their shadows blurred together. "We're two of a kind, you and me," Martin murmured, stroking Dusty's neck. "Outlasted by our own stubbornness." It was Dusty, in truth, who forced Martin to keep reaching out to the world outside his fence. One morning, the horse's leg flared hot and swollen. Martin muttered a curse, then hobbled to the kitchen and thumbed through the crumpled business cards tacked on the fridge. He paused over one. Dr. Emilio Ruiz, DVM, a recent transplant to the area and something of a curiosity among old-timers. Martin dialed the number expecting an answering service, but Dr. Ruiz himself picked up. His voice was warm, gentle. "I can be there in an hour, Mr. Sullivan. Don't worry about the call-out fee. I'd like to meet your friend." Dr. Ruiz arrived in a muddy sedan, stethoscope swinging from his pocket. He moved quietly, never rushing, and Martin watched him work with professional care, checking Dusty's legs, listening to his heart, speaking softly to the skittish horse in Spanish and English alike. Dusty, usually wary, let him lift the sore leg and apply a cool compress. "You've done good work here," Dr. Ruiz said, straightening up. "He's healing, but it will take time. Trust is like bone. It mends slow, but it gets stronger." Martin nodded, feeling pride and embarrassment in equal measure. "I'm no expert, just stubborn." The vet smiled, writing a prescription. "Sometimes that's enough. Most folks give up on what they can't fix right away. You haven't." Afterward, they sat on the porch with 2 cold sodas. Dr. Ruiz glanced at the stack of letters by the door. "Those for your daughter?" Martin blinked, startled, then laughed, a harsh sound. "Yeah, suppose they are. None of 'em sent." Dr. Ruiz studied him, kind eyes steady. "You know, horses and people aren't so different. They remember wounds, sometimes longer than we'd like. But they can surprise you if you keep showing up." Martin shrugged. "Showing up doesn't always fix things." "No," the vet agreed, "but it's a start." When the doctor left, the loneliness returned. For a moment, Martin nearly gave in, tempted to crumple the letters. Forget the phone calls, let the silence swallow everything that remained. But as dusk fell and Dusty limped to the barn, Martin felt a flicker of resolve. He'd be steadfast for Dusty's sake, if not for his own. Giving up was too easy. Showing up, that was the hard part. That night, he carried his unsent letter to the barn. As he sat beside Dusty, reading the words aloud to the quiet, Martin realized he was not speaking only to his daughter, but to the broken parts of himself. And in the hush of that moment, horse breathing slow, storm rumbling far off, something like forgiveness drifted in, unspoken but real. The sky darkened with a warning that no farmer in Arkansas would ignore. By late afternoon, thick clouds boiled over Denton Hollow, turning the fields a bruised green. The wind whipped up dust, sending loose shingles rattling on Martin Sullivan's roof. He moved through his evening chores faster than usual, one eye always on the horizon, the taste of rain heavy in the air. Dusty seemed anxious, stomping and tossing his big gray head as thunder rolled closer. Martin tried to soothe him, running a brush along the horse's shoulder, murmuring, "Easy now. Just a little thunder, that's all." But Dusty's ears pinned flat, eyes wide with memories of storms and worse. The first fat drops slapped the barn roof, then came in sheets. Martin ducked outside to check the fence line, squinting through the sudden downpour. Lightning stitched the sky, thunder cracking so close it rattled his chest. He saw Dusty, eyes wild, circling the paddock, sides heaving. The wind caught the old gate just right, wrenching it open with a rusty shriek. Before Martin could shout, Dusty bolted. The gelding's run was more a desperate lurch than a gallop, but fear lent him speed. He crashed through the half-open gate and vanished into the growing dark. "Damn it! No, no, Dusty!" Martin's voice vanished under another roll of thunder. He snatched his rain jacket, grabbing a flashlight and a halter, and limped into the storm. The world beyond the barn was chaos. Rain slashing sideways, mud sucking at Martin's boots, trees bending under the force of the wind. Every flash of lightning painted the landscape in stark black and white. Martin's leg screamed in protest as he half ran, half dragged himself along the fence row, the beam of his flashlight jittering over the fields. A distant shape caught his eye, a flash of movement by the north pasture. Martin pressed on, heart pounding, ignoring the ache in his knee, ignoring the voice in his head whispering that he was too old for this. He called Dusty's name again and again, voice hoarse, barely heard over the storm. He found Dusty tangled in barbed wire, trying to pull free. Blood streaked the horse's gray hide, rain already washing the wounds raw. Dusty snorted in panic, eyes rolling white, muscles trembling with fear and exhaustion. Martin's army training took over. "Easy! Hold it! Don't fight!" He moved in, body low, hands steady. Lightning snapped overhead. He tossed the halter over Dusty's neck, fingers numb and clumsy, then unclipped the wire with the multi-tool he always carried on his belt. The barbs tore at his own hands, slicing through skin, but he worked quickly, methodically, just like in the field hospital so many years ago. Blood welled up from Dusty's leg, a bad cut, deep but not fatal. Martin pulled off his jacket, wrapping it tight around the worst of the wound. The horse staggered, sides heaving. Martin pressed his forehead against Dusty's neck, feeling the wild hammering of the animal's heart. "You're all right," he whispered. "You're not alone. I'm here." They stumbled back together, mud clinging to their legs, Martin leaning hard on his cane, Dusty limping heavily, but trusting him enough to follow. Every few steps, the horse faltered, threatening to collapse, but Martin coaxed and pleaded, offering every ounce of strength left in his battered body. By the time they reached the barn, the storm had settled into a steady, relentless rain. Martin led Dusty inside and lowered him onto the straw, then set to work with the supplies he kept in an old ammo box. Gauze, antiseptic, the last of the good bandages. His hands shook from cold and pain, blood mixing with mud, but he didn't pause. Outside, the thunder raged on. It was hours before the bleeding stopped. Martin's own hands were cut and swollen, his back screaming from the effort. He slumped against the stall, feeling the cold seep into his bones, rainwater pooling around his boots. Dusty's breath slowed, his eyes drifting closed as exhaustion won out over fear. Martin checked the bandages one last time, then sat beside the gelding, head in his hands. For a moment, he let the memories take him. Battlefields slick with rain. The smell of blood and gunpowder. Friends lost in the mud and dark. He'd always been the one who went back for the wounded, who wouldn't leave anyone behind. It was a habit that had cost him dearly, but he didn't know how to be any other way. The storm eased toward dawn. Martin drifted in and out of sleep, waking each time Dusty shifted or whickered. He forced himself up, checked the bandages, made sure the horse was still breathing, still with him. When the sun finally broke through, painting the barn gold, Martin stood and stretched, pain flaring in every muscle. He looked down at Dusty and saw the gelding watching him, wary but no longer afraid. There was something new in the horse's gaze, a spark of understanding, a flicker of gratitude. Martin let out a long, shaky breath. "We made it, old friend," he said. "Against the odds, again." For the first time in years, he felt the pride of survival. Hard-won, battered, but real. They had both faced the storm and refused to quit. That, Martin thought, was all anyone could ever ask. The days after the storm dawned clear and crisp, the air rinsed clean, the fields shining with dew. Martin Sullivan limped out to the barn each morning, feeling every ache and bruise from the night he and Dusty had fought the storm together. But there was a new steadiness in his steps, an unspoken bond formed through hardship. Dusty stood waiting for him, eyes bright despite his bandaged leg, greeting Martin with a soft nicker that warmed the old man's heart in ways he hadn't thought possible anymore. Life settled into a fragile routine again. Martin fed and tended to Dusty, reinforced the battered paddock fences, and patched the leaky roof, sometimes whistling tunelessly as he worked. He found himself talking to Dusty more than ever, sharing stories and jokes, as if speaking for both of them. He noticed the way the horse watched him, ears flicking at every word. Something cautious but curious growing in those gray eyes. News of the storm and the battered warhorse spread faster than Martin expected. Denton Hollow wasn't much for secrets. By the end of the week, neighbors began showing up, first out of curiosity, then something close to respect. It started with Mrs. Langley, who arrived bearing a pan of cornbread and a shy question about how Dusty was healing. Martin was startled at first, unsure what to say, but soon the two stood together in the barn, watching Dusty munch apple slices and swapping stories of lost animals and found hope. The next day, young Travis Miller rode up on his dirt bike, feigning casual interest. "My dad said you pulled that horse out of the wire during the storm," he said, pretending to study the clouds. "Said he saw your light moving across the fields when everyone else was hunkered down." Martin shrugged, uncomfortable with attention. Did what had to be done, that's all. But Travis kept coming back, asking questions about horses, then about war stories, then about life in general. Sometimes he helped Martin clean Dusty's stall or refill water buckets, his tough teenage shell slipping away as he learned to trust the old man. Other folks followed. Some brought feed, some brought old tack, and a few just brought themselves, drawn by the tale of a man and his horse refusing to quit. For the first time in years, Martin's porch became a gathering place, voices drifting through the evenings, the kitchen filling with laughter and the smell of shared coffee. Of all the visitors, Dr. Emilio Ruiz returned most often. He checked on Dusty's wounds, praising Martin's care, and urged him to keep a close eye for infection. On one visit, after examining Dusty's leg and finding it nearly healed, Dr. Ruiz sat beside Martin on the hay bales, dust swirling in shafts of afternoon light. "Have you ever thought of sharing your story, Martin?" the vet asked gently. Martin bristled. "Ain't much of a story to tell. Just stubbornness and bad luck." Dr. Ruiz smiled. "You'd be surprised. People need to hear about resilience and about the quiet kind of courage that keeps showing up, even when the world says you're finished." Martin snorted. "Folks around here already think I'm odd enough. Don't need to make a spectacle out of myself." But Dr. Ruiz pressed on. "The Heartland Rescue Fair is coming up next month. There's a slot for community stories, rescues, recoveries, second chances. I think you and Dusty could inspire a lot of people." Martin hesitated. The idea of standing in front of a crowd, exposing his battered heart, made his stomach clench. Still, something about the doctor's steady gaze planted a seed. Martin nodded, non-committal, but the thought lingered. Later that night, sitting in the barn with Dusty, Martin mulled it over. "What do you think?" he murmured, voice low. "You reckon anybody wants to hear from a couple of old has-beens?" Dusty leaned close, pressing his broad head against Martin's chest, breathing slow and steady. The gesture was answer enough. The next morning, Martin's resolve was tested by a surprise visit from Marlene Carter, the editor of the Denton County Weekly. She bustled in, notepad ready, hair in a frizz from the drive. "Everyone's talking about you, Martin. Mind if I get a quote or two? Folks love a good comeback story." Martin groaned, wishing he could disappear, but found himself talking anyway. About the storm, about Dusty, about what it meant to risk yourself for someone, anyone, who couldn't fight for themselves. Marlene scribbled furiously, asking for details, then snapped a photo of Martin and Dusty, standing side by side in the barn's golden light. By the following week, the story was out. War Vet and Warhorse, a story of grit and grace. Martin dreaded the attention at first, but something curious happened. Neighbors he'd barely spoken to in years stopped by to shake his hand. Teenagers volunteered to help repair fences, and a group of women from the church brought over hot meals and asked if he needed groceries. For the first time since Maggie died, Martin felt his world widening. Each new visitor chipped away at the fortress of loneliness he'd built around himself. He watched Dusty, once skittish and haunted, now eating from strangers' hands, standing quietly as children ran their small fingers through his tangled mane. The horse was learning to trust again. So, Martin realized, was he. Dr. Ruiz returned one last time before the fair, standing beside Martin as the sun set over Denton Hollow. "You ready?" the vet asked quietly. Martin hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at him. But then he looked at Dusty, alive, standing tall, healed by stubbornness and love, and felt a flicker of hope. "I'll do it," he said at last, "for him, for both of us." In the hush of twilight, as the fields glowed gold and the barn stood open to the world, Martin understood something simple and profound. Sometimes, healing meant letting others in, even if it hurt, even if it risked being seen as weak. Sometimes, healing meant telling your story loud and clear, so others could see they weren't alone. The day of the Heartland Rescue Fair dawned bright, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains in Martin Sullivan's kitchen. He'd barely slept, nerves running wild beneath his calm exterior. His old suit, pressed and set out the night before, looked strange and stiff after so many years of denim and dust. In the barn, Dusty snorted impatiently as Martin buckled the new halter, his wounds mostly healed, his coat brushed to a silver shine that caught the morning light. "Big day, partner," Martin said softly, running a hand down Dusty's neck. "Let's not make fools of ourselves." The horse nudged his pocket, searching for treats. Martin obliged, offering a sugar cube with a rueful smile. "Guess we both need a little courage." The drive to the fairgrounds was silent. Martin's battered pickup rattled over country roads, Dusty riding in the borrowed trailer behind. Every now and then, Martin glanced in the rearview mirror, anxiety fluttering in his chest. The crowd, the noise, the spotlight. He'd avoided all those things for years. Now he was about to walk right into them, exposed in a way that made his hands tremble. When they arrived, the fairgrounds buzzed with activity. Vendors selling lemonade and homemade pies, children darting between rows of booths, rescue dogs barking, the air alive with the scents of barbecue and hay. The main arena stood at the center, freshly raked dirt shining under banners that read, "Hope in every hoof," and "Healing through rescue." Martin kept his head down as he led Dusty from the trailer, feeling dozens of eyes on them. It seemed like everyone in Denton Hollow had turned out, plus strangers from as far away as Little Rock and Memphis. The article in the county paper had done its work. People pointed, whispered, then waved, calling Martin's name. He nodded, trying not to blush, feeling both foolish and oddly proud. Backstage, the other entrants prepared. Young women with glossy horses and matching ribbons, Older men with sturdy mules, a little girl clutching the halter of a rescued donkey. Martin's hands shook as he checked Dusty's bandages one last time, his fingers fumbling with the lead rope. Dr. Emilio Ruiz found him in the chaos, offering a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You ready, Martin?" Martin swallowed. "Ready as I'll ever be." The announcer's voice echoed across the grounds. "Next up in our parade of rescues, Martin Sullivan and Dusty, representing Denton Hollow." A hush fell as Martin stepped into the ring, Dusty walking at his side. They made no attempt at a showy entrance, no fancy tack, no tricks, just two survivors moving together. Martin felt every limp in his own body reflected in the horse beside him. He could hear the whispers. "That's the old war vet. That's the horse from the storm." At first, a few people in the bleachers seemed to stifle laughter, nudging each other. Dusty's scars were plain as day, Martin's limp impossible to hide. But as they made their slow circuit of the arena, something shifted. The sun caught the silver in Dusty's mane, the gentle curve of Martin's hand on his shoulder. There was no rush, no need to prove anything, just the truth of two broken souls refusing to quit. Martin reached the center and stopped. He looked up, scanning the sea of faces, and cleared his throat. "I won't take up much of your time," he said, voice trembling. "This here is Dusty. Folks said he wasn't worth saving. Hell, some said the same about me after I came home from the war, broken, angry, full of ghosts. But we found each other. We walked home together. Every day since, we walk a little further, inside and out." The crowd was silent now, drawn in by his words, the quiet gravity in his voice. Martin continued, "You don't have to be a hero to save a life. Sometimes all it takes is stubbornness, and showing up day after day, no matter how much it hurts. Dusty taught me that. He reminds me, every scar means you survived." He reached out, and Dusty, sensing his nervousness, pressed close. Martin smiled, blinking back sudden tears. "We're both still healing, but we're not alone. Not anymore." A single clap echoed, then another, then a swelling roar of applause. Martin stood blinking, stunned, as people rose to their feet. Some cheered, others wiped away tears. Children pointed, faces bright with hope. Even the skeptics seemed moved, their grins replaced by something gentler, respect. Dr. Ruiz joined him in the ring, presenting Martin with a simple ribbon that read, "Healing through hooves." The moment felt surreal, but honest. The announcer declared, "A standing ovation for the kind of courage we don't always see, a quiet courage." As Martin and Dusty left the arena, hands reached out to shake his, to stroke the horse's neck. Strangers told their own stories. Lost family, lost animals, hard-won hope. Martin listened, realizing that telling his story had cracked something open in the people around him. The fair was no longer just about ribbons and competition, but about survival, belonging, and second chances. In the shade behind the arena, Martin knelt beside Dusty, pressing his forehead against the horses. "We did it," he whispered. "We showed them." That evening, as the fair wound down, Martin and Dusty walked together through the emptying grounds. The sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, the air cool and sweet. They were just a man and his horse, battered but unbowed, moving forward with every step. Martin realized he was no longer afraid. Not of the crowd, not of his scars, not even of the future. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of hope, solid, grounding, real. The high from the Heartland Rescue Fair lingered for days, a gentle glow in Martin's chest. Strangers who'd never looked his way before stopped to shake his hand at the feed store. Neighbors honked their horns in greeting, calling, "We're proud of you, Martin." Children slipped carrots and apples over the fence for Dusty, who took to his newfound stardom with shy curiosity. For the first time in years, Martin's loneliness seemed to retreat, replaced by warmth and cautious hope. But summer in Arkansas has a way of reminding folks that joy is fleeting. One late afternoon, as the sky darkened with the heavy promise of rain, Martin moved through his chores with a growing unease. He watched thunderheads roll in from the west, wind bending the tall grass flat, a sharp metallic scent in the air. Dusty, usually calm since the fair, stamped restlessly in the paddock, flanks shivering despite the heat. Martin hurried to secure the barn, checking latches and bracing the loose stall door. He called out to Dusty, trying to keep his voice steady. But the horse pranced along the fence, nostrils flaring. The first fat raindrops fell, quickly building to a wild, sideways deluge. Lightning forked above the pasture, thunder booming close enough to shake the windows. Then, in a flash of wind and panic, Dusty spooked. The gate, not properly latched after Martin's last visitor, blew open with a bang. Dusty bolted, hooves churning mud, and before Martin could react, the horse had crashed through a section of sagging fence and vanished into the storm-tossed field. "Dusty! No, damn it!" Martin's voice was swallowed by the wind as he hobbled after his horse, heart hammering with dread. The rain was blinding, every step through the pasture a battle with mud and tangled grass. His leg burned, old injuries protesting with every stride. It felt like hours, stumbling through the dark, calling Dusty's name until his voice cracked. When he finally found the gelding, the horse was trembling near a broken cedar, one hind leg caught in wire and bleeding anew. Martin's breath caught. So much blood, the old wound reopened, the white of bone threatening through torn flesh. He dropped to his knees, hands shaking, working the wire loose as thunder rolled overhead. "It's all right, Dusty. I've got you. Hold on, just hold on." His own voice sounded small and desperate in the wildness of the storm. He managed to free Dusty, but as they staggered back toward the barn, Martin's strength flagged. The world narrowed to pain and worry. He couldn't lose Dusty now, not after all they'd survived. Halfway across the yard, his leg buckled and he fell, scraping his hands and cursing himself for weakness. Dusty, limping and frightened, circled back, lowering his head to nudge Martin's shoulder, as if begging him to get up. "I'm all right. Just need a second." Martin tried to rise, but dizziness washed over him, the barn lights spinning. For a moment, he thought he'd lose both horse and hope right there in the mud. And then, out of the darkness, a new voice, sharp and urgent. "Dad! Dad, are you all right?" Martin blinked, rain stinging his eyes. A figure in a yellow raincoat came running, slipping in the mud but not stopping. She was taller than he remembered, her hair dark with rain, her eyes wide with fear and determination. Catherine? For a moment he thought he was dreaming. He hadn't seen his daughter in years. Her visits always promised, never realized. But here she was, breathless, muddy, real. She knelt beside him, steadying his arm, her voice trembling. "What are you doing out here? Are you crazy?" He let out a ragged laugh, half relief, half heartbreak. Wouldn't be the first time someone said that. She turned her attention to Dusty, assessing the wound with practiced hands. She'd clearly been around horses since she left home. "We need to get him inside. Stop the bleeding. Can you walk?" "I'll manage." With her help, Martin rose, the world spinning but steadied by her presence. Together, they coaxed Dusty back to the barn, Catherine whispering to the horse as they moved. Inside, the barn felt like a sanctuary, the storm's fury muffled by thick walls and the yellow glow of the old lantern. Catherine dug through the first aid kit with calm authority, cleaning Dusty's wound, applying pressure and binding the leg tight. Martin watched, awe and shame warring in his chest. He wanted to say 1,000 things. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I've missed you." But the words caught in his throat. After the worst had passed and Dusty stood, trembling but safe, Catherine sank onto a hay bale, brushing wet hair from her face. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with all the years and things unsaid. Martin sat beside her, staring at his hands, then at her mud-streaked boots. Finally, Catherine broke the silence. "You always did have a knack for finding trouble, Dad." Martin snorted. "Guess it runs in the family." She looked at him, searching for something in his face. "Why didn't you call when you needed help?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "I tried. Maybe I didn't try hard enough." A soft, uncertain laugh broke from her lips. "You're as stubborn as ever." They fell into a tentative rhythm, talking, not arguing, for the first time in years, as the storm eased and the barn quieted. Catherine helped Martin mend the battered fence, working side by side until the job was done. In the lamplight, with Dusty standing watch, it felt like the beginning of something, fragile, unfamiliar, but possible. That night, as father and daughter sat in silence, the rain tapping gently on the roof, Martin felt a weight lift. Forgiveness would take time, but it had a place to grow. He glanced at Catherine, saw her looking back, and in that exchange found hope. Wary, determined, alive. The sun rose over Denton Hollow with gentle warmth, glistening on the wet grass and broken fence lines. For the first time in years, Martin woke to the sound of someone else moving about the kitchen. Catherine, her steps familiar but changed, echoing memories of a distant childhood. He lay in bed a moment, listening to the clatter of mugs and the low hum of a country radio. The house didn't feel quite so hollow. Downstairs, Catherine poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and set them at the table. Martin shuffled in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, surprised by the comforting scent. "You still take it black?" she asked, half smiling. He nodded, voice thick. "Haven't changed a bit." Breakfast was quiet, broken only by Dusty's snorts from the barn and the low whir of the ceiling fan. The words didn't come easy, not after so much time, so many regrets. But Catherine didn't push, and Martin was grateful. The old wounds between them were still there, but they didn't ache quite as sharply now. Forgiveness, he realized, was more a practice than a single act, built from countless small gestures, not grand apologies. After breakfast, they stepped out into the pale sunlight. The yard was a mess. Fallen branches, battered fence posts, mud everywhere. Catherine rolled up her sleeves. "Let's get to work." Together they cleared debris from the pasture, their hands moving in sync. Sometimes they talked about the weather, about repairs the barn still needed, about Dusty's appetite for apples. Other times, they worked in silence, the easy kind that came from shared purpose. Dusty followed them everywhere, his limp easing with every careful day of rest and care. Catherine brushed him in the mornings, singing under her breath, her voice low and sweet. Martin repaired the fence, stopping now and then to watch his daughter, heart swelling with a blend of pride and humility. He was struck by how much she'd grown, how sure her hands were with horses, how quickly she learned the rhythms of the land. Over the next week, the days settled into a gentle pattern. They rebuilt the fence line post by post, Martin hammering, Catherine steadying the rails. At midday, they shared sandwiches on the porch, the dog from next door lying at their feet, the air thick with the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. In the evenings, they tended Dusty together, cleaning his wounds, checking his bandages, laughing as he nudged them for extra treats. It was in those small, ordinary moments, Catherine's quiet laughter as Dusty stole a carrot, the brief, unguarded smiles they traded over shared chores, that Martin felt something healing inside him. For years, he'd tried to fix things with apologies and explanations, but none of that mattered as much as simply showing up day after day, doing the work together. One afternoon, after hours spent mending a stubborn section of fence, Catherine flopped onto the grass, out of breath and smiling. Martin sat beside her, dust streaking his jeans, sweat glistening on his brow. They watched Dusty roll in the dirt, legs flailing, before he scrambled to his feet and trotted over for a scratch. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Catherine asked suddenly, shading her eyes from the sun. Martin hesitated. "After your mother died, I thought about it every day, but I couldn't leave. Too many memories. Too much of her in the land, the house, the barn." He looked at her, searching her face. "You." She picked a blade of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "I tried. For a long time, I thought I had to get away, start fresh, but everywhere I went, I missed home, even when I was mad at you." He felt a lump in his throat, but didn't look away. "I'm sorry, Kat, for all of it. For not calling, for not being what you needed after your mom." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry too. I should have come back sooner." Her voice wavered, but she smiled. "But I'm here now. That's what matters." In the barn that evening, as dusk painted the sky in watercolor pinks and blues, Martin and Catherine brushed Dusty together. The horse stood still, head low, eyes half closed in pleasure. The old radio played softly, static fading in and out. Martin told Catherine stories about the fair, about the night of the storm, about the little ways Dusty had helped him hold on. She listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes wiping away tears. There were setbacks. Dusty's leg swelled one morning, sending a jolt of fear through them both. Martin panicked, but Catherine reassured him, tending the wound with practiced hands, calling Dr. Ruiz just in case. The vet arrived, checked the leg, and pronounced it healing well. Martin let out a sigh, realizing just how much he depended on both Catherine and the horse now. As the days grew longer, the farm began to feel less like a collection of broken things and more like a home again. Martin and Catherine cooked meals together, cleaned out the attic, found old family photos that made them laugh and cry. At night, they sat on the porch with mugs of tea, watching fireflies dance over the pasture, sharing memories and dreams for the future. One evening, as they finished dinner and Dusty wandered up to the fence, Catherine told a joke Martin remembered from her childhood. He laughed, a real, deep belly laugh, the kind that had been missing from his life for far too long. For a moment, the years of pain and silence fell away, replaced by simple joy. As twilight settled over Denton Hollow, Martin realized that family was less about blood or history and more about the choice to keep showing up, to keep mending what's broken, to forgive, to rebuild, no matter how hard. In that soft, golden hour, with Catherine by his side and Dusty grazing nearby, he felt hope take root, steady and real. They still had far to go, but for the first time, Martin believed they'd get there, together. The seasons shifted in Denton Hollow, summer's green giving way to gold and russet. The air carried a softness that made everything feel possible. Leaves drifted from the old sycamores, swirling over the fields, catching in the fence lines that Martin and Catherine had rebuilt side by side. Life had become a series of small rituals, familiar, comforting, and precious in their simplicity. Martin rose early each morning, sometimes to the sound of Catherine humming in the kitchen, sometimes to Dusty nickering outside the window. He never rushed anymore. There was no need. He took the days as they came, moving slowly, limping less. Pain in his leg replaced by something steady and warm in his chest. The house felt alive again. Dishes in the sink, boots by the door, the low buzz of conversation drifting from room to room. Some evenings, they all sat on the porch as the sun slid behind the hills, painting the sky in gentle pastels. Martin in his old rocker, Catherine curled in a quilt on the steps, and Dusty grazing within arm's reach, the grass soft under his hooves. The peace was never loud or showy. It lived in the quiet, in the presence, in the steady beat of life continuing despite everything that came before. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when silence settled too heavy. When Martin caught the ache of loss in Catherine's eyes, or found himself reaching for Maggie's photo in the hallway. Sometimes Dusty's limp flared up after too much play, and Martin's leg would throb with the memory of shrapnel. But none of that was enough to shake the foundation they had rebuilt, day by day, scar by scar. The outside world didn't forget them. Strangers who'd heard the fairground story drove out to Denton Hollow to shake Martin's hand, to bring Dusty carrots and apples, to tell their own tales of loss and hope. A teacher from the next county brought a group of children, letting them brush Dusty and hear about second chances. The horse, once withdrawn and suspicious, took it all in stride, his patience and gentleness turning him into something like a legend around those parts. Catherine thrived, her laughter ringing out through the barn as she taught Martin how to use her old digital camera, capturing Dusty's antics and the changing colors of the farm. She started planting a garden out back, her mother's favorites, wildflowers and sunflowers, inviting Martin to help her plan for spring. They cooked together most nights, learning new recipes and laughing at their failures, turning the kitchen into a place of memory and invention. Sometimes, as dusk fell, Martin would find himself reflecting on the journey, the storms, the heartbreak, the long, painful march back to belonging. He understood now that healing was never a single moment, never a sudden revelation. It was 1,000 quiet choices, to get up, to try again, to reach out even when you were certain the world had turned its back. It was in every time he brushed Dusty's coat, in every time Catherine called him Dad, without hesitation, in every shared meal and every hard-won smile. One afternoon in late autumn, Martin sat with Catherine and Dusty under the old oak tree. The air was cool, the grass fading from green to gold. Martin watched as Dusty grazed, his coat thickening for winter, scars visible but fading. He thought about all the times he'd been ready to give up, on the farm, on himself, on family, and felt a quiet gratitude for having been proven wrong. Catherine stretched out on the quilt beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I used to think family was just what you were born with," she said. "Now I think it's what you make." who you show up for every day, even when it's hard. Martin smiled, running a hand through her hair. That's the bravest thing there is, Kat. Sticking around, even after the hurt. Dusty wandered over, nuzzling Martin's hand, warm breath puffing in the cool air. Martin fed him a slice of apple, scratching the horse's neck where the scars had healed. He looked at Catherine, at Dusty, at the home they had all reclaimed. "We're a funny-looking bunch," he said, grinning. "Not perfect, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." They fell into an easy silence, broken only by the distant call of a hawk and the rustling of leaves. The peace felt deeper than any quiet Martin had known before, rooted in acceptance, in forgiveness, in the promise that belonging wasn't reserved for the flawless or the unscarred. It was something you earned, something you tended, something you built together, no matter how late or how broken you arrived. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a final blaze of color, Martin rose, helping Catherine to her feet. They walked together to the porch, Dusty trailing behind, the three of them forming a picture of quiet resilience against the coming night. Inside, they lit the old lamp, the golden light pooling on the worn kitchen table. Catherine made tea, humming one of her mother's favorite songs. Martin sat, feeling the years settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a collection of stories, hard, beautiful, unfinished. Dusty stood at the door, head bent to peer inside, ears flicking at the sound of laughter. Martin let him in, unbothered by tradition or rules. Family, he thought, was about making room for the lost and the found. As they gathered around the table, Martin knew the world outside could be harsh, that storms and sorrow would come again. But he also knew they had built something stronger than loneliness or pain, a home stitched together from forgiveness, stubborn hope, and the refusal to let go. He looked at Catherine, at Dusty, at the life remade from scraps and second chances. "We made it," he said quietly. Not by being brave all at once, but by refusing to quit, by loving even when it was hard. Catherine squeezed his hand, her eyes bright in the lamplight. Dusty nudged their shoulders, warm and steady, and in that circle, father, daughter, horse. Martin understood at last. The greatest rescue wasn't saving Dusty, or even himself. It was finding his way home. Healing is slow, built on patient acts of care. Worth isn't skin deep. Family is mended through forgiveness and presence. True courage is the daily refusal to give up, on oneself or another. Love and acceptance are the greatest rescues of all.